The market has been open for a little over an hour. My time, I'm Central Standard Time, and I noticed that NIO had a bunch of trade volume showing up, about 20 million shares pretty early on, and it was almost all selling pressure. Now, we've kind of talked about this on Twixter amongst a few of us about how it almost looks like there are selling algorithms set up to take NIO down at the open sometimes. I don't know if that's in play. I'm really not concerned about it, but I wanted to go in depth, and actually we're going to jump back to video in the comment section from the other day heading into the weekend. I had someone, Endureil, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, offered some really good data that I was able to take a little further with my research. He said, on my broker, Avanza, that's in Sweden, there are short certificates with leverage up to 8x on NIO. And then he gave some information, including some of the, I guess, tickers is what you would maybe reference them as. Now, Nordnet is one of the companies that was mentioned by him, and then Morgan Stanley as well. So walk with me, and by walking, I mean just watch, and I'll share the tabs, and we'll kind of go through this. Nordnet, remember them? I just mentioned them. This is from back in 2022 in May. The financial, what are they called? Financial Supervisory Authority in Sweden was talking about Nordnet short selling rule breaches, and here's what they said. The FSA said the violations had meant a considerable risk that customers were short selling shares without coverage, so-called naked short selling, which is banned, and that Nordnet had been aware of the deficient procedures since 2018 without rectifying all of them. Now, again, this article is from a couple years ago, so we're talking May 2022. Let's get a little more current. How about Morgan Stanley? These are some of the certificates issued by Morgan Stanley and Company internationally, and NIO is on here for, I believe, long and shorts. But this phone number, the international code 46, is for Sweden. So I'm just out here trying to connect dots. This is where things get really interesting, though, especially if we look at the historical chart for NIO. Now, what we've got are the white lines representing fails to deliver. That's when shares couldn't be located. Now, this is only in the U.S. market, but where shares couldn't be located to trade with the stock. And there's only one that I want to point out before we get into the time frame that I think is relevant for the bearishness that's gone on for the last few years with NIO. This is a day where it was in October that this data was reported, where there were over a million, almost 1.5 million shares that couldn't be located. And there were only 25 million shares traded in the US market that day, at least according to the data that we get. This is where things get really interesting. It was the end or late in 2021, which this is the end of 2021 and the beginning of 2022. That's where I remember talking about Citadel as the suspicious short, taking a short position in NIO at that time. And NIO prior to that had been trading in the $40 range. And then what happened along with that, before we saw these spikes of the fails to deliver start popping back up in the US market, this is what looks like may have gone on in the European market. The London Stock Exchange, I believe these guys are either set up and have shops in perhaps both Ireland and the UK, but either way, we're talking about Europe. And here is the leveraged short position on NIO. I pulled this up because I wanted to go back and see when it was created. It looks like it was created at the beginning of 2022 or the end of 2021. So imagine if this is a tool outside of the US market that is used by firms to short. Here's the other thing. This is the more recent data that shows Citadel with the filing as of May 15th is still short NIO. They've got a put showing up of 9.5 million shares. That's a few shares, right? But that's in the US market. Here's the other piece. If we go over to another area within, I believe this is also the UK's where these guys are located, Granite shares, and we come on down here. This is more recent data than what I'd shared the other day. It looks like Citadel has, sorry, I'll let you see this, number of short positions. Now, again, this is in Europe. Citadel advisors with 8 short positions. It is possible that they're using leveraged short positions in the European markets to perhaps mess with stock price. And it would align with, we've got time frame alignments. Again, if we go back here to the NIO stock price with the fails to deliver popping up. Now, Citadel as a market maker in the US does get some advantages. They get kind of a pass on some naked shorting. So they could be doing this in the US market and then also levered shorting NIO in the European market, which gives them a lot of hours throughout the course of a 24-hour period where they're perhaps messing with things. And I doubt that if they are, this is just NIO they're doing it with. So for me, it's bigger picture concept overview, but I can't help but recognize the negative stock price decline that aligns with some of these time frames. And so I wanted to share it. And this seems appropriate, especially as I mentioned this morning, we had, the company as a company, NIO is better positioned than it's ever been. And there was a great interview that was just done by Al Jazeera. So if you haven't seen that, maybe I'll put a link for that in the description as well, of William Li from NIO. But I think it's crazy that NIO is so well positioned, and yet the shorting seems like it could be at an all-time high, and not just in the US market, but across markets. And so I am glad. I don't know if people saw that, and I've referenced it before. I didn't queue it up. I thought it would be too much data to share in this one video, but recently the CSRC, the Chinese regulators have basically complained and said there's way too much shorting going on. I think they're more likely to do something about it over there. The problem is you've still got the European markets, you've still got the US markets. And so I do think big picture overview for the company and for the stock, I think NIO with profitability, it's really important. Also, I've mentioned this before, but it's worth mentioning again. I will link these in the description as well. I do believe that historically what we've seen with companies that trade at penny stock values early on, before they are recognized as true IDEs, innovative driven enterprises, they can trade very low from an evaluation standpoint prior to profitability. After profitability, they seem to take off, and sometimes take off with massive moves. I'm talking about companies like Netflix and Tesla and Amazon and NVDA. These are companies that have traded very cheap in the past early on, but eventually once they prove themselves, I guess, to the market or maybe to the big money, who weigh in eventually when they see, okay, this is a profitable company and they have a big potential footprint, whether it's globally or across multiple regions and countries. I think NIO is one of those companies. It's why I picked them. It's also why I picked them as a long-term play, because I wanted to give them the time they need. And the lens, the view of the guy, William Li, running the company is certainly long-term. If you consider, and I'm referencing this early interview, he talked about a couple things like how quickly smartphones became the norm across the globe. And he referenced that it took only about 10 years. And so he thinks that smart EVs are going to do the same, not necessarily because of the sustainability play, but the tech play, that the technological aspect of the smart EV essentially being able to do everything and more than a phone. It makes a lot of sense. I think the guy sees, I believe he's a visionary, and I have nicknamed him Mr. EQ. That's for his emotional quotient. He is incredibly intelligent. His IQ is also really high. But this is a guy who I believe sees things that others still need years to catch up on. So I hope I'm right. I hope we're early. I think we are. Time is the ultimate reveal. Let me get this thing up and out. Have a great day. Thanks for stopping through. I'll see you all again.